Across the horizon of judgment and despair, I stand before you with the soul awakened, not by the echoes of a name or a label, but by the luminous truth of what my eyes have witnessed. In a world quick to label and condemn, I journeyed into the heart of a people so often spoken of in hushed tones and harsh syllables. Yet in the midst of what many called terror, there bloomed the tender pulse of humanity, a vivid tapestry of hope, struggle, and resilience that defied every distorted claim. This moment, etched in the soft glow of understanding, unraveled the fabric of inherited misconceptions and sparked within me a profound transformation. It is here where the fierce winds of prejudice gave way to the gentle embrace of compassion that I discovered a faith born not of fear, but of the raw, unmistakable truth of human condition. Let us lean in closer to this truth, letting it guide us to see beyond the narrow confines of labels and into the vast harmonious realm of our shared humanity. In a world that often wraps us in narrow definitions and tight categories, I remember the first time I truly questioned these imposed labels, the moment when I realized that society's definitions could never grasp the complexity of our shared humanity. I walked through a landscape etched with preconceptions where every face I encountered was a story waiting to be told, yet the label affixed upon them obscured their individual voices. The air was heavy with judgment, every whispered stereotype weaving a web that threatened to trap us all in the identity of others' making. But within that charged silence, a spark of understanding began to kindle, a spark that urged me to look deeper, to challenge what I thought I knew, and to embark upon a journey that transcended the narrow confines of what society declared. I began to see that behind each label was a life, vibrant with longing, pain, and the fierce desire to belong. I reflected on the power of words, how a simple label, cast like a stone, could shatter the delicate glass of human dignity. It was in the bustling streets and quiet corners where I encountered those who wore these labels like armor, not out of pride, but as a testament to survival. Their eyes held histories too profound to be summarized by a single word, and in each glance I began to discern the raw beauty of their inner world. I recalled a moment, whispered accusations still echoed in my ears, and I questioned whether my own heart had ever been so quick to judge. The memory of that instant became a mirror, reflecting not only the pain of misunderstanding, but also the untapped power of genuine empathy. Every day as I traveled through spaces laden with the weight of expectations and assumptions, I found that my gaze shifted slowly, ever so imperceptibly, from the surface to the depths of being. I realized that the journey from a simple label to a deeper understanding of a person is much like a river, carving out new pathways, eroding the hard banks of prejudice over time, and nourishing fields that once lay barren with false narrative. The process was neither immediate nor easy. It demanded patience, vulnerability, and a willingness to be changed by what lay hidden beneath the surface of appearances. I learned that every time I chose to open my heart a little wider, I allowed the rich, diverse tapestry of human experience to unfurl before me, a tapestry woven with threads of joy, suffering, resilience, and hope. There were moments when the harshness of the world nearly overwhelmed the tenderness I had begun to nurture. I witnessed lives condemned by history, reduced to a single brutal narrative that denied the fullness of their spirit. In those moments, the labels, so cold, so unyielding, seemed to echo like the distant pounding of an unkind drum. Yet even there, in the midst of despair, I discovered that the human soul possesses an inexhaustible capacity for it. It was as if with every new story I heard and every encounter that defied expectation, a small fissure formed in the hardened wall of prejudice, letting in a soft light that illuminated our common struggle to be understood and to be loved. I walked among those who were deemed unworthy by societal decree, and what I found was a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any judgment ever. Their laughter, their tears, and the subtle gestures of daily grace taught me that the heart does not measure worth by the labels imposed by others. It senses a truth that transcends such trivial. In witnessing their lives, I came to understand that labels are poor custodians of identity, for they encapsulate only the surface while ignoring the boundless depths. I remembered conversations that began with disdain but gradually transformed into dialogues of mutual respect, Dialogues that revealed the common threads binding us to one another regardless of how we were labeled. With each shared smile or knowing glance, I felt the barriers of prejudice dissolve, replaced by a landscape of shared experience and tenderness. It was in those quiet hours of introspection, long after the clamor of hostile words had faded into night, that I began to truly appreciate the transformative power of seeing beyond the facade. I allowed myself to be vulnerable, to accept that I, too, had once clung to these simplistic notions, only to later find that my soul had been craving a more expansive connection to the world. In that vulnerable state, I discovered that to be human means to wander through this maze of misunderstanding, and eventually to find solace in the arms of empathy and compassion. I realized that the labels we cast so carelessly are nothing more than fleeting shadows in the vast light of our shared humanity, and that true wisdom lies in recognizing that every soul has a story that defies easy categorization. In those moments of clarity, I started to see that the journey towards deeper understanding begins with the courage to question what we are taught. Each encounter with a person who defied the stereotypes became a lesson in humility and wonder. I began to see that the fear which fuels the need to label others is rooted in a longing to understand the unknown, and that the antidote to such fear is none other than love that is expansive and unyielding. I learned that when we approach one another without the constraints of judgment, we unlock the potential to connect on a level that transcends the superficial. The smiles and sorrows of every individual become a universal language, resonating in the caverns of our hearts and reminding us that underneath the banners of different causes, beliefs, all are united by a common desire to be seen, heard, and cherished. As I walked the road of transformation, every step felt like a silent prayer against the tyranny of labor. I questioned the narratives that had been woven over generations and discovered that the true measure of a person is found not in the word assigned to them, but in the light that shines from. In this unfolding revelation, every falsehood gave way to a richer, more vibrant truth. A truth that celebrates complexity, honors the distinctiveness of every individual, and recognizes that every person carries within a universe of dreams, struggles, and triumphs. With every new horizon I reached, I felt my spirit expand, capable now of embracing all that I had once viewed as the unknown. It was a journey marked by both sorrow and joy, of restless nights and quiet revelations, a journey that taught me that life, in all its messy brilliance, cannot be reduced to a simple label or a single story. I learned that every person, regardless of the identity imposed upon them, is the keeper of a sacred narrative, a narrative that yearns for recognition and love. And as I continue to walk in that gentle light of understanding, I remain ever hopeful that by opening our hearts to the truth beyond labels, we may one day see one another not as isolated fragments, but as parts of a magnificent whole. A shared humanity that sings in unison with the timeless rhythm of life. There was a moment deep in the quiet of a spring morning when I saw not a label, but a living, breathing testament to the power of transformation. As I traveled through winding streets lined with memories and possibilities, I encountered faces that shattered every myth and every preconceived notion I had ever held. In the soft light of that day, I realized that the true story of a life is never encapsulated by the hollow whispers of judgment, but instead it is revealed in the delicate interplay of hope and resilience, in the quiet determination found in the eyes of someone whose spirit remains unbowed by a world that sought to define. I stood there mesmerized as real lives unfolded before me like a symphony of truths, each note resonating with the beauty of authenticity that defied every negative stereotype. I remember the tremor in the voice of an elderly man who spoke of his youth with a tenderness that carried the weight of countless dreams deferred and yet rekindled. His words were not the harsh sound of resentment, but rather a gentle hum of a life fully lived. A life that was never truly defined by the darkness that others had imposed upon it. In his cadence, I detected the transformative power of experience, a narrative that refused to be shackled by historic labels and that sang of liberation from a past of misunderstanding. It was in that moment that I saw the luminous truth. The boundaries we impose, the preconceptions we rely upon, often serve as mere backdrops to the rich, ever-unfolding play of human existence. Every glance I exchanged with those who carried the weight of assumptions broke down the walls built by society. Their stories, as varied and multifaceted as the hues of a sunset, resonated deeply with the promise that every person holds within, a brilliance waiting to be discovered, to be nurtured, to shine unfettered by the chains of prejudice. In their laughter, I heard the echoes of childhood dreams. In their quiet, I sensed the strength born from years of standing tall amidst. They were living proof that when you witness the authenticity of someone's life, you embark on a journey that shifts your perspective from fear to wonder, from judgment to understanding. I recall the day I met a young woman whose eyes sparkled with a defiant joy and untold pain intermingled, a living contradiction to the caricatures often painted by those who never cared to see beyond this. As she shared her story, her words were woven with threads of sorrow and triumph, crafting a mosaic that radiated a strength far more potent than any label could ever say. Her journey was an open testament to the transformative power of realizing that our true identities lie in the essence of our being, not in the crude tags thrust upon us by the world. Every word she spoke melted away the icy veneer of prejudice, revealing the vibrant, often painful beauty of human resilience. In her narrative, I discovered that true understanding blooms when you allow yourself to absorb the full spectrum of experiences that color our shared existence. In the faces of those I met, I found a quiet revolution, a gentle uprising of authenticity that whispered, "I am more than what you see." Each soul carried its own rich tapestry of joys and sorrows, narratives that were far too intricate to be confined within the narrow limits of a single word or stereotype. There was a silent dignity in the way they moved through life, a kind of grace that defied the dominant narratives and challenged the simplistic labels that society so eagerly applied. In witnessing these real lives, I felt a stirring inside me, a call to dismantle the barriers of misconception and to embrace a truth that is as complex as it is beautiful. Every time my gaze met another's, there was a spark, an undeniable reminder that behind every external shell lies a heart brimming with passion and unspoken story. With each conversation, the air around us seemed to thicken with the promise of shared humanity, a mutual recognition that transcended the barriers of language, culture, and expectation. I learned that the transformative act of truly seeing someone without the lenses of prejudice is a form of quiet magic, magic that has the power to rekindle old dreams and foster new beginnings. And as I listened, I recognized that these authentic encounters were not merely fleeting moments, but rather milestones marking the evolution of empathy and understanding. The impact of these encounters was profound, stirring a deep and unyielding awareness within me. I began to understand that the essence of humanity lies not in the superficial judgments we pass on one another, but in the intricate layers of love and resilience that each person holds close. The stories of those who defied labels were like gentle rain on a parched landscape, nourishing the earth and inspiring growth in the most unexpected places. In their eyes and in their words, I found a reminder that we are all connected by the universal thread of humanity, a thread so delicate yet so strong that it weaves together the diverse experiences of every single soul I encounter. I walked alongside people whose lives were a testament to the human spirit's indomitable, a will that refuses to be diminished by misrepresentation or ignorance. In the quiet bravery of their daily existence, I witnessed the transformative power of mere presence. It is in the act of being truly seen, of engaging with someone's story on its own terms, that you begin to unravel the tangled skein of misunderstandings that have long divided us. Through their narratives, I discovered that the struggle against negative stereotypes is not waged with anger or confrontation, but with a tender, relentless commitment to looking deeper, to seeing the unseen and hearing the unspoken. The experiences that unfolded before my eyes were as natural and profound as the rising sun. With each passing encounter, the dim haze of outdated preconceptions lifted further, placed by the radiant clarity of truth. I felt my spirit awaken to a realization that our lives are interconnected in ways that defy our simplistic measures. The transformative power of witnessing real lives lies in its ability to challenge and change, to provoke introspection, and to inspire a rediscovery of our shared values. As I absorbed the depth of each story, I began to see that our differences are not obstacles, but rather vibrant strokes on the canvas of life that together create a masterpiece of unity and boundless possibility. I marveled at how the relentless pursuit of truth led me from the cold edges of judgment into the warm embrace of understanding, a place where labels dissolve like morning mist under the light of genuine connection. In the soulful exchanges of glances, the rustle of whispered confessions, and the gentle cadence of heartfelt dialogues, I discovered a world where every person's struggles and triumphs coalesced into a collective celebration of life. There was an undeniable magic in these moments, a magic that transformed fear into hope and ignorance into a deep, resonant. It was as if every story, every broken narrative that had once been overshadowed by prejudice now shone with the glow of authenticity and pure, unadulterated humor. There were instances when the power of these encounters struck me with the force of a revelation, a reminder that in the face of overwhelming misconceptions, the human spirit stands resilient, ready to embrace the truth that each individual is a universe unto himself. The act of witnessing real lives, free from the confines of narrow perceptions, filled my heart with a joyful determination to celebrate every nuance of existence. In that celebration, I found a fountain of strength and inspiration, a continual source of light that guides me through the darkest valleys and into the open meadows of understanding. Every word spoken, every tear shed, every smile shared served as a gentle reminder that within the framework of our varied experiences lies an unbreakable bond, a bond that transcends all labels and unites us in our collective journey toward a more compassionate tomorrow. In that sacred space of genuine connection, I learned that the transformative power of witnessing real lives goes far beyond mere observation. It is an immersive experience that challenges us to let go of the comfortable certainties and embrace the wild, uncharted territory of true human potential, a potential that blossoms only when we allow ourselves to see the world as it is, free from the distortions of our own biases. And as I continue to traverse this ever-changing landscape of human stories, each encounter engraves upon my heart a deep-seated belief that true transformation is born of love, understanding, and a steadfast commitment to honor the rich tapestry of lives that defy all expectations. There is a profound tension between the narratives that have been force-fed to us and the living, breathing truth of what it means to be human. I have often found myself reflecting on those distortion stories that cast entire peoples in a single, all-encompassing shadow, versus the undeniable dignity that radiates from each person who lives and loves. It is one thing to be told that a group of people embodies a negative stereotype, but quite another to watch in awe as individuals defy those expectations with every smile, every tear, every decision that speaks to their true essence. I have witnessed firsthand that beneath the surface of any label lies a wealth of experiences, hopes, and dreams, each one a quiet act of rebellion against the simplistic narratives imposed by a world too eager to categorize. I remember a day when the sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows that intertwined with the streets of a bustling neighborhood. There, amid the hum of everyday life, I encountered a man whose quiet dignity immediately disrupted the distorted tales that had been told about his. His presence was not the caricature of fear or anger. It was the image of a man who carried his heritage with a soft pride that could soften the hardest of hearts. His eyes, deep and reflective, told stories of generations that had survived adversity, of dreams that refused to be extinguished, and of an inner light that no label could. In him, I saw that every sweeping negative generalization was not only wrong, it was a betrayal of the truth and obscuration of the vibrant lives that flourished against all odds. Every time I have stepped into a room filled with voices that were meant to be silenced by misunderstanding, I have have been struck by how the distorted narratives fall apart when faced with lived experience. The reality is that every individual carries within them layers of complexity that no headline or soundbite can capture. In the quiet nod of an elder or the spirited conversation of a young woman, there's a story that demands to be heard, a narrative that affirms life despite the weight of falsehoods. I have been moved by encounters where the simple act of looking someone in the eye dismantles preconceived notions, replacing the harsh brushstrokes of misinformation with the vivid colors of lived truth. There is an art to living that cannot be reduced to the shallow caricatures fed to us by the media or by history books. And every person I have met has been a masterpiece in their own right. It is in these moments that I have come to understand that the power of contrast lies not in merely opposing one idea to another, but in revealing the profound depth that each individual harbors. The distorted narratives are often constructed from fragments of reality, the misinterpreted, the misunderstood, the isolated into a blanket that denies the nuanced mosaic of experiences. Yet, when you stand in the presence of someone who embodies resilience and tenderness, you realize that the true story is far richer than any stereotype. The glimmer of hope in a parent's eyes as they watch their child play, the soft determination etched on the face of a community rebuilding after loss, the everyday acts of love and defiance. All these are threads that weave a picture of humanity that is starkly at odds with any negative narrative. I have seen the dissonance between what is said and what is lived, a gap filled with stories of quiet triumph and unspoken solidarity. In a conversation with a woman who had endured years of marginalization, her voice broke through the static of societal prejudice, unwrapping layer after layer of her story, stories of struggle that led to strength, of sorrow that birthed compassion, and of small victories that challenged an oppressive narrative. Her words, laced with the enduring truth of her experience, painted a picture so vibrant that it forced me that the human spirit is far more resilient and beautiful than any false representation. It is this truth that compels us to question everything we have been led to believe, to pry open the closed doors of ignorance, and to step into the light of genuine understanding. There is something incredibly liberating in this moment of contrast, a moment when you face up to the fallacies that have been carefully constructed by those who would deny you the truth of your own humanity. When you see beyond the narrative, you begin to appreciate the unvarnished reality of what people are complex beings with hearts that beat with passions wide as the horizon, and with experiences that defy any one-dimensional portrayal. I found myself drawn into conversations that wove together the past and the present, the personal and the collective, inviting those around me to embrace the diversity of experience with an open arm. In each story told, each life lived, there was a quiet resilience that spoke louder than any accusation or stereotype could ever hope to drown out. It is not merely a matter of disproving a fallacy. It is an act of reclaiming identity, of reasserting that the truth of who we are cannot be hijacked by the misinterpretation of a few loud voices. I have walked through neighborhoods where every face bore the weight of assumption, yet in every smile, every tear, and every word, there was an unyielding strength that shattered the monochrome illusion of negativity. In the laughter of children playing in crowded streets, in the humble dignity of a shared meal, and in the silent nods between those who have been misunderstood, I found a counter-narrative that was as stirring as it was undeniable. It is this inherent dignity, the raw, unedited truth of being, that stands in opposition to the distorted narratives. It challenges us to rise above the simplifications and recognize that every life is a testament to the beauty of imperfection. I have learned that our collective history is not a canvas for dark, oppressive motifs, but a living, breathing tapestry of light that refuses to be quenched by the weight of misrepresentation. There's a kind of healing that happens when we see beyond the labels to the hearts beneath. I have felt it in moments when conversation turns to reflection, when silence speaks volumes, and when shared stories coalesce into an understanding that transcends the boundaries of heritage stereotypes. In the eyes of a stranger who opens up to reveal the quiet strength born of hardship, I found a mirror reflecting not the distorted view the world might have, but the undeniable truth of resilience and beauty. It is an ever-present reminder that every time we challenge a preconceived notion, we move a step closer to a world where the truth of one's experience shines brighter than any fabricated myth. By engaging with lived experience, the raw, unfiltered truth of what it means to live and love, we can begin to dismantle the edifice of stereotypes built by years of distorted narrative. Each encounter is a small revolution, a gentle act of defiance against the forces that would reduce a person to a single negative tag. I have seen how the act of truly witnessing someone's life ignites a spark of recognition that each individual, in truth, a repository of countless stories capable of evoking empathy and admiration beyond measure. The dignity that emanates from real tangible lives is like a beacon in the night, guiding us away from the misled paths of prejudice and toward a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the human spirit. As I continue to encounter and reflect upon these experiences, I am constantly reminded that the inherent dignity of every life stands in stark contrast to the distorted narratives that seek to simplify us. The powerful interplay between what is constructed as false and what is lived as true reveals a world brimming with potential, a world where each story is a clarion call for justice, for recognition, and for the unyielding affirmation of life in all its glorious complexity. Every shared glance, every heartfelt conversation, every moment of silent acknowledgement becomes a building block in the foundation of a more compassionate understanding, one that honors the full breadth of our shared humanity without compromise. There are moments in life that leave an imprint deeper than words, moments that stretch time and reach inside the soul with a quiet power that shifts everything you thought you knew. I remember one such moment with a clarity that feels like the hush before a prayer. It wasn't marked by any grand spectacle, no loud announcement, no thunderous sound. It was a soft, almost imperceptible shift. A glance, a gesture, a word spoken in a tone so calm it disarmed every defense I had built up over years of absorbing the world's noise. I found myself sitting across from someone the world had labeled, someone I had been taught to fear. Yet in that silence between our words, I felt something I couldn't explain, a strange, unfamiliar stillness inside me that felt like truth settling in. It wasn't a decision I made, not in the usual sense. No one stood on a stage and convinced me to abandon what I thought I believed. No one handed me a script and asked me to change my lines. Instead, it was as if something sacred had brushed up against my soul and asked nothing in return, only to be seen, to be heard, to be felt. And in that space, I didn't hear a declaration or a command. I heard a whisper to the same, "Be still." And for the first time in a long time, I did just that. I sat with the discomfort. I sat with the unraveling of what I thought was certainty. And I listened not with my ears, but with something deeper, something that had been asleep and was now beginning to stir. There was a rhythm to that moment, the kind of rhythm that doesn't demand attention but holds it all the same. Like the rustle of leaves in a warm wind, like the sound of your own breath when the world goes quiet. It was a rhythm I had never noticed before, but one that felt ancient, like it had always been there, waiting for me to slow down enough to hear it. In that rhythm was faith, not the kind you recite or memorize, but the kind you feel before you even know what it is. It was not born of doctrine, but of presence. It arrived not through persuasion, but through connection. And it filled the space between us with something both heavy and light, something so familiar and yet utterly new. That moment didn't ask me to abandon my past. It didn't require me to forget where I had come from or the questions I had carried. It didn't erase the wounds or pretend they had never been there. Instead, it wrapped around them with a gentleness I had never known. It said, bring your pain, bring your doubt, bring the whole of who you are, and somehow in that invitation I felt seen in a way I never had before. I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel tested. I felt healed. And in that holding, I began to see the outlines of something I hadn't known I was searching for. It wasn't a conversation that changed me. Though words were spoken, it wasn't sermon, though truths were offered, it was present. It was a human being sitting with another, not to convince, but to simply be. And in that being, I saw compassion so vast it silenced every voice of doubt I had once followed. I saw integrity lived not in proclamations, but in quiet, consistent action. I saw humility, not the performative kind, but the sort that bows its head even when no one is watching. And I saw strength not in the form of dominance, but in the gentle courage to remain open in a world that often tells us to close ourselves off. There was a woman who passed me a cup of tea that day. That's all, just tea. But the way she passed it, 2 hands, eyes soft, no words, carried something that lingered. I felt the warmth of the cup in my hands long after the tea had gone cold. And I knew, without needing to explain how I knew, that what I had experienced was not just kindness. It was a sacred offering. A gesture so ordinary it almost went unnoticed, and yet so extraordinary it changed the direction of my heart. It was in that moment, cradling that simple cup, that I realized I had touched something divine. The transformation that began in that moment did not happen all at once. It unfolded like dawn breaking slowly over a quiet field, light creeping in bit by bit, reshaping everything in its path. It began with small questions, questions that didn't demand answers, only honesty. Questions like, what if everything I've been told isn't the whole truth? And what if the people I feared are the very people who can teach me how to heal? These questions didn't come with judgment or shame. They came with curiosity and wonder, with an ache to understand. And each time I leaned into them, I felt the ground beneath me become more real. What moved me in that moment was not a single revelation, but the cumulative weight of a truth that had been waiting for me to see it. A truth that lived in the hands that offered bread to a stranger, in the voice that recited ancient words with tenderness and joy, in the silence between prayers, in the laughter of children who had never known the luxury of innocence and yet chose joy anyway. These were not people I had come to pity. There were people who showed me what it meant to live with depth and dignity. People who held their suffering and their faith in the same hand, without apology. That was the moment I felt something shift in me. It was not loud, it was not dramatic. It was like a door opening to a room I didn't know existed in my heart. A room filled with softness, with space, with a sense of returning. And I didn't have words for it at the time. I still don't have perfect ones. But I know what I felt. I know it was real. And I know that in that moment, something sacred passed through me and whispered, this is truth. Not a truth that demands allegiance, but a truth that invites you to come home to yourself through the eyes and hearts of others. Since then, I have carried that moment with me like a hidden jewel, wrapped in memory and gratitude. Not to hold it too tightly, but to remember how it felt to be changed, not by force, but by presence. Not by fear, but by love. And though I cannot recreate that moment for anyone else, I know what it can mean when one soul sits with another in quiet reverence, expecting nothing, offering. I know what it means when we choose to see beyond the walls we have been taught to build, and instead allow ourselves to be seen not as enemies or strangers, but as reflections of the same divine spark, flickering and alive, waiting to be acknowledged. Sometimes the things that change us most don't announce themselves with any fanfare. They come quietly, like a warm breeze brushing against your cheek on a still night. You don't always know what's happening in the moment. You just feel a stirring, a shift, a crack forming in the walls you didn't even know you'd built. And before you can name it, before you can define it or box it up in words, it has already begun. This transformation that doesn't just touch your mind but reaches straight down into the marrow of your spirit. That's how it felt. Not like I chose it. More like it chose me. Or maybe we found each other somewhere in the middle of pain and grace, of brokenness and truth. I was simply walking, trying to understand, trying to see clearly in a world that had always told me who the enemy was. But then I looked again, and what I saw didn't match the script. The soil where that transformation took root wasn't some faraway land filled with philosophers or saints. It was right there in the dust, in the chaos, in the laughter of children whose playground was a war zone. It was in the patient hands of mothers making meals out of almost nothing, in the strength of fathers holding on to dignity in the face of systems designed to strip it. It was in the eyes of the old men sitting in cracked plastic chairs sipping tea, not saying much but carrying generations of resilience in their silence. These were not the faces of terror. These were the faces of love surviving, somehow, in spite of all. Love that didn't ask to be noticed. Love that didn't need applause. Love that simply existed. And in their existence, they told a truth far louder than any accusation. I didn't come seeking faith. I didn't arrive looking to convert her to be transformed. I came with questions, with skepticism, with all the layers of armor I thought I needed to move through a world so full of cruelty. But the thing about truth, the deep kind, the kind that hums through your bones, is that it doesn't need you to believe in it for it to be real. It just is. And when you stand close enough to it, when you let yourself breathe it in even just a little, something inside you starts to break open. That breaking isn't painful the way you might expect. It's more like a shedding. Like peeling away what no longer serves you, layer by layer, until what's left is raw and real and entirely yours. There were moments when I wanted to hold on new. I wanted to keep my old definitions, to cling to the comfort of familiar narratives. But then I would see something, a small act of grace, a word spoken from the heart, a prayer whispered not in fear but in trust, and I would feel that soft pull again, that nudge, that question whispered in the spaces between my heartbeat. What if this is the truth? Not the kind of truth that needs to fight or shout to prove itself. The kind of truth that simply sits with you, patient and unyielding, until you are ready to see it. And the more I listened, the clearer it became. I wasn't witnessing a belief system that demanded obedience. I was seeing a way of living. A way of seeing, a way of returning to the quiet dignity of what it means to be human. One evening, I watched a group gather for prayer. There was no stage, no sermon, just a rhythm, a rising and falling of bodies in sync with something much older and more sacred than anything I had ever known. It wasn't the ritual that moved me, though that was beautiful. It was the intention, the stillness. The sense that each person in that moment was stripped of every title, every role, every label. They were just souls in communion with the divine. And something about that struck me so deeply I couldn't turn away. It wasn't about religion in the way I had been taught to think of it. It was about presence, about humility, about standing in the face of something greater and saying, here I am. In those quiet observations, I saw reflections of things I had longed for but never quite found. Discipline that wasn't harsh, but rooted in love. Community that didn't exclude, but embraced with gentleness. Faith that didn't shame doubt, but welcomed it as part of the journey. I saw beauty in the simplicity. The beauty of a call to prayer echoing through crowded streets. The beauty of hands lifted in supplication, not out of desperation, but out of trust. The beauty of sacrifice, of patience, of resilience, didn't roar, but whispered, we are still here. And slowly, without fanfare, I began to understand what I was being drawn into. It wasn't a conversion of religion. It was a returning to something I didn't know I had lost. A belief that life can still be sacred, even in the most broken places. This transformation, if that's even the right word, didn't happen in a flash of lightning or some dramatic revelation. It unfolded in layers, in glances, in moments of shared silence. It grew in the spaces where fear had once lived. It filled the hollows left by cynicism and exhaustion. And it asked of me only this, to keep paying attention, to keep walking with my eyes open, to let love and truth and tenderness reshape the way I saw the world. I began to pray, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of gratitude for the stillness, for the clarity, for the unspoken knowing that I had found something I hadn't even known I was searching for. It is one thing to change your beliefs. It is another to have your heart rearranged by what you witness, to have your soul rewritten by moments so honest and raw, you can no longer pretend not to see. And once you've seen, once you've felt that pulse of truth rising through the cracks of everything you thought you understood, there is no going back. Not because you've been told to stay, but because you've tasted something real. Something that lingers in your breath and your bones and won't let go, not out of control, but out of deep, abiding love. The kind that roots you and lifts you all at once. The kind that makes you brave enough to begin again, this time with open hands.